Now, when I say horror comedy, what comes to mind? Movies like Shaun of the Dead, Army of Darkness, Dale and Tucker, and even Scary Movie, or to the extreme of Scream, which is more of parody. What would you say if I told you that the best horror comedy is potentially something you've never seen or never even heard of? And that's what we're going to dive into today. Welcome back to Basement Horrors. I'm Jake, and today we are talking about Club Dread. Now, the other day I was trying to find a movie to watch that I hadn't watched in a while, and I was going through my movies trying to figure it out, and I saw Club Dread. And I was like, you know what? I haven't seen Club Dread in a while. It used to be one of my favorite movies. I decided I was going to give it another watch just for the sake of it. And what ended up coming out of it was, at the end of it, me believing that not only is it the best horror comedy ever made, but it potentially would even be put into a different category outside of horror comedy, just for how good of a horror movie it is in general. Now, before we get into this, go ahead and like and subscribe. It helps us out. It helps the channel grow. And remember, we have a lot of content coming up, like Horror Hound and a bunch of other stuff. So be on the lookout for that. Horror Hound is in March, but we'll have a bunch of videos up before then as well. Now, if you've never heard of Club Dread, it is by Broken Lizard. The same guys, the same acting troops, the writers, everything like that. That did Super Troopers 1 and 2, that did Beer Fest, that did that movie that was like Waiting, but I can't remember the name of it, Slappin' Salmon or something like that. I don't know. Look it up. That's also a good one. I just don't remember the name of it because it's their least popular one out of all of their movies, but it's still really good. But you get the gist of it. It's those same guys. I'm pretty sure they do Tacoma FD on Fox now. But it's those same guys, same type of comedy, everything like that. But it is a horror comedy. Now, it's set around a group of people who are, I guess, like camp counselors, but it's not really a camp. It's more of like an island in the middle of the ocean where it's sort of like a resort getaway camp at the same time for adults. The main character is just a complete ripoff of Jimmy Buffett, and that's what this whole entire island is about, is pretty much this guy who just makes Jimmy Buffett type music and adults who are coming to party with him on this island for, I would say, like a week or so. And the main characters themselves are all people who do different things for this camp. Now, you got all of them. You got all the main characters that are in Super Troopers and Beer Fest. They each all have individual things that they bring to the table in this movie as far as their character, you know, what type of personality they are. Like, one of them is like a DJ slash drug guy who everybody goes to get the drugs. One's a massage therapist who is so good that if he touches you, he knows different pinpoints in your body that can do different things to you. There is one who is more of the tennis and athletics kind of guy. And then you have another one who is more of like, you know, the swimming, let's go out and jump off cliffs. Like that kind of thing when you go to like a resort and there's like that one guy who like takes you off and like, we're gonna go cliff diving and I'm gonna show you like all of these cool exotic spots. It's like that. So to get the gist of it, it kind of just starts to happen pretty early in the movie. You know, you start off with a scene with your typical, you know, horror trope of, you know, of this couple in the jungle, messing around, getting into stuff they're not supposed to, going to ancient sacred burial grounds and doing it, and they end up getting killed. And, you know, that's that first kind of horror trope that they hit on, where you start to realize that, oh, you know, this isn't just like a horror comedy, it's more of like a parody towards horror, because you start to see these things happen over and over again from different horror movies or horror franchises that you're like, oh, you know, that's from that, and that's from that, and that's from that, where they pulled from it to make this film. And overall, you know, you get it. It's more of a slasher. Throughout the whole entire movie, camp counselors start getting picked off, and I keep calling them camp counselors because of like Friday the 13th, but it's not. The employees of this resort, one by one, get picked off, and they're trying to figure out why. And it ultimately comes down to a who is the killer mixed with like a slasher. And that's really cool to me. You know, it builds suspense of trying to figure out, you know, who is the killer. Like, you start to notice these little things and you're like, oh, that's possibly him, that's possibly him. And at the end of the day, it's all about figuring out who the killer is to progress the storyline. And there's some really gnarly kills, there's some really good jokes, there's really good gore. And as I was watching it, and then after I got done, I started processing and I started thinking to myself, is this movie not only probably the best horror comedy, because, you know, I love Shaun of the Dead. Shaun of the Dead is one of my favorite movies. Simon Pegg and Nick Frost, everything they've done, the whole entire Shaun trilogy is phenomenal. I love Hot Fuzz. I love World's End. I even like Paul, which is even not even part of the trilogy, but it feels like a Simon Pegg and Nick Frost movie. This is in a whole different category for me because when I started to think about it, it's not necessarily just a horror comedy. This movie, I think, is just a better version of Scream. And I know you're going to rip into me for this, but Scream's not my favorite franchise. Honestly, I'm kind of just on overload and sick of Scream at this point. The new trailer for the new Scream, I'm just like, who cares? And I know that's a hot, I know that that's a hot take. Not everybody's going to agree with that. The majority of people aren't going to agree with that. I think Scream should have ended after the first one. I think Scream was a parody of horror movies, and that should have been it, and it should have been done. Ghostface isn't a good killer to me because he is not a singular killer. He's not a singular entity. He is literally multiple people who could do multiple different things. And it's not the same as having a singular one killer who is the same throughout the entire franchise, like other franchises like Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th. Now, that being said, I'm not saying the Scream franchise is bad. I'm saying it's not great to me. I'm kind of over it and sick of it and think they should just move on because it's all played out and been done before. And the way I see Club Dread now is just the better version of Scream. And what I mean by that is Scream was supposed to be a parody of horror movies, but also be a horror movie in itself, in which that's what it did. It set into a whole franchise with Ghostface and these horror movies that slowly started to progress out of being parody into actual horror movies. And that's when it kind of lost me, because that's what was the big thing about the original Scream, was the fact that it was a parody. It was making fun of horror movies, essentially. It was making fun of cliches and tropes of what people do in horror movies and what you're not supposed to do in horror movies. And I love that about it. And that's what Club Dread does. Club Dread is more of a parody to horror than what it is a horror comedy. And for it to be that way, it makes it so good because you can differentiate the horror from the comedy. Now, the best part about that is you're getting the comedy scenes in comedy context, which I like. You're getting them in comedy context, which is, hey, we're going to set up a joke and here's the joke. And then you're getting the horror in the horror setting. So the horror scenes in Club Dread feel like a horror movie. Like they don't let up. They're relentless. There's good gore, there's good story building, there is good suspense. It is legitimate horror, and I cannot take away from it by saying horror comedy, because it is legitimate horror in those scenes. The comedy scenes are comedy scenes. There are some funny scenes, and if you know them, you know Beer Fest, you know Super Troopers, you know it's going to be funny. But there's way less of funny scenes than what there are horror scenes, and that's what makes this a genuine horror movie that is parodying horror franchises. One of the biggest things, and spoiler alerts for those who have never seen the movie, if you haven't seen the movie, go watch it right now. I believe it's on HBO Max. You will not regret it. And afterwards, watch Beer Fest, because, like, might as well watch back to back with them, because it's such a good franchise that, you know, you want to watch Broken Lizard movies back to back, because it just keeps feeding into that universe of them. But spoilers, the ending is awesome, because the ending, you get that combined. They take it and they finally combine it at the end, where they finally find out who's the killer. The killer starts chasing them. Very good suspense, very good horror throughout that whole entire thing. But when they finally kill him at the end, it is just this ridiculous, over-the-top, gory cliche on, you know, he's not dead until you know he's dead, you know, thing where, you know, they try to kill him and then, like, he's still alive, and then they try to kill him again, and then he's still alive, and then he pops up out of the water and grabs the girl and pulls, just like Friday the 13th, just like the end of Friday the 13th. It's phenomenal. It's so good. It's so underrated. And I truly believe that it is the best horror comedy ever made. Shaun of the Dead, I think, can arguably put up in that point. I would not be mad if I said Shaun of the Dead was the best, or if somebody else said Shaun of the Dead was best. Shaun of the Dead rightfully deserves that #1 spot of being the best horror comedy ever made. I think if there was genuinely a competitor to that movie, it would be Club Dread. And the reason why I'm taking it realistically out of that category is that way it doesn't compete with Shaun of the Dead, because it's not the same as Shaun of the Dead. It's completely different comedy. It's completely different styles of writing and gore and storytelling. And like I said, I believe Club Dread is more along the lines of Scream. I would put it above Scream in kind of that category of parody horror, that is just making fun of horror movies and but genuinely comes off as a legitimate, genuine horror movie. So that's that. If you agree or disagree, tell me down in the comments, or if you think there's a better horror comedy, let me know in the comments below, and we will be back soon with another video. Thank you.